Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. And we are happy to welcome back to the show Daniel Idfresne. Daniel, you've been on here multiple times, but I know there were people meeting you for the first time. Take a moment to tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Hi, and thank you for welcoming me back on the show. My name is Daniel Idfresne. I'm a Syracuse senior, Syracuse University, and I'm a Young Voices contributor with bylines and Real Clear Politics, New York Post, Fox News, Newsweeks, and others.
Well, I'm looking at an article that you have published in Real Clear Politics here that is extremely relevant, especially for those who are following the New York City mayor's race. So I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Zohran Mamdani, is that close?
Well, it's Zohran Mamdani, but close
Mamdani, okay.
enough. The identitarians will say you have to check your privilege, but
I tried and I apparently failed, but um, I know that he's making big waves I think he's earned the Democratic nomination to run for mayor of New York City, and that's causing people to pay a lot closer attention. He's making a lot of promises regarding social justice, making New York City more affordable. Your article says, hey, for those New Yorkers who have a dog in this fight, they need to pay attention to what's happening in Chicago. Apparently, a lot of the things that Mamdani is running on are things that have been tried before in Chicago. Talk to me a little bit about what's happened under um, Mayor Brandon Johnson.
yeah, so me and Mickey Horseman, who's another Gen Zer who is based in Chicago, we decided to work together to write an op-ed, a warning to our fellow Gen Zers about the failed promises of Mayor Brandon Johnson, because a lot of Zohran Mamdani's proposals follow a similar umbrella, as both of them consider themselves, to some effect, democratic socialists. In Chicago, first off, there was a promise to build a large sum of affordable housing, yet only around 500 units were built after burning through hundreds of millions, I believe 300 million in subsidies. And so Zohran Mamdani, he's promising 100 billion. He's promising that he will build 200,000 affordable units with $100 billion in taxpayer funds. And when we look at Chicago, New Yorkers should be skeptical and think if Chicago can only muster 500 units with 300 million in subsidies, what makes New York City different? And some I've heard say that New York City is a bigger city. New York City is different and unique because of the size comparisons and because of the unique political corruption that happens in Chicago. But I would submit to them that government corruption is the same everywhere in all bureaucracies, whether it's a city or the federal government is susceptible to that corruption.
You mentioned in your article too, not only did Chicago blow through hundreds of millions while only, actually achieving 500 new units, but on top of that, rent went up significantly, didn't it?
Yes, Chicago experienced one of the highest, if not the highest, rent hike in the city compared to year over year. And in New York City, we're dealing with an affordability crisis. And while there are pro-growth solutions like rezoning, and if we take Zoran's promise to build 200K affordable units at face value, and we assume that he is able to deliver on that promise, yes, there are some supply side solutions that could help out with New York City. But the chief problem, in my opinion, and many economists' opinions, is the rent stabilization problem. But Zohran Mamdani wants to freeze a rent for let's say 4 years with rent stabilized apartments. The problem is half of the city's apartments are rent stabilized. And so you're essentially forcing spillover demand into unregulated apartments. You're forcing landlords to try to claw back some profits in those unregulated apartments, which will increase the prices of rent in general in New York City, because half of the apartments in the market have had their rents frozen for 4 years.
Wow. Plus, I mean, everybody knows the cost of everything is slowly but surely going up. So maintenance on those apartments. I mean, if something breaks, and it does, just in the course of everyday life, the costs to fix that are going higher. And you're right, landlords are going to have to try to make that up somewhere. And that's probably going to lead to some cutting of corners. What about safety? When it comes to safety in New York City, what is Mamdani promising to do in that regard?
Well, the biggest solution that Zohran Mamdani has proposed to New Yorkers is his new Department of Community Safety, which he argues will lift the burden off of NYPD officers by station mental health workers and social workers and the like to help treat homeless New Yorkers, or I guess a progressive left would say unhoused New Yorkers. Uh, the problem is that the Department of Community Safety will cost New Yorkers more money. Can you believe it? I don't believe it. It's not surprising because a lot of the policies that Zohran Mamdani and Democratic Socialist types tend to be more bureaucracy is the answer. And in this Department of Community Safety, I haven't heard really any journalists in New York actually really question Zohran on this. He outlines where half of the money for the Department of Safety will come from, but then he says that there are inefficiencies and we need to cut waste and bureaucracy to come up with the other half of the Department of Community Safety. Well, how does that square with Mamdani's previous anti-police beliefs, calling the NYPD an anti-queer and a racist police force, that we need to defund the police? How does that square with its calls to dismantle the SRG in New York City, which is a strategic response group, which one of his duties is crowd control when some of these protests get out of hand? And that's the basis for why Mamdani and the DSA types want to eliminate the SRG. Does inefficiencies and bureaucracies, does that mean the SRG? These are questions that we need to ask Mr. Mamdani, but it seems that we're not getting those answers.
Let's talk about too. These I think you referred to them as boutique police reforms. This has been tried in Chicago as well. What kind of results did Mayor Johnson in Chicago have?
Well, so Mayor Johnson, he instituted a few he removed ShotStopper, which is a gun detection system that will allow police to know where gun violence is happening in an area and quickly respond to it. He eliminated that policy, and he's made it so that the Chicago Police Department now has to pay police officers overtime to fulfill its duties. These are the sort of boutique police reforms that, when you're in a safe area, when you're more of an academic type and you're shielded to some degree from gang violence and whatnot, that you can make these arguments. But we know that in low-income communities and communities marred by crime, the answer is simple to those in those communities, which is prosecute those who are criminal recidivists, and keep our cities safe with the best tools at your disposal.
Yeah, I mean, you cover so much more in this article, and unfortunately, we are up against the clock. We won't get to go into the making all bus fares free. Um, boy, I I guess all I can say there is, boy, when it's free, that it should make it really interesting taking public transportation. Which, as you mentioned, that's something that neither Mondami nor Johnson really have to worry about, do they?
No, they don't. They don't at all. And I guess the overall, by comparing Chicago and New York City, Mickey and I really try to convince our Gen Z peers that yes, we hear you. Affordability is hurting us too, but ultimately we have to be very discerning with what these new politicians, these democratic socialist types, are promising us. Because when you look under the hood, really, I think the results can be disastrous, as Chicago has proven.
Again, we've been visiting with Daniel Idfresne. He's a student at Syracuse University and a Young Voices contributor. Where can people find you on social media, Daniel?
You can find me at Daniel Idfresne. My last name is spelled Idfresne on X, Instagram, and TikTok.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we have a familiar voice rejoining us. Mike Viola has been with us many times over the years. Mike, it's good to have you back on the show. For the sake of those who are hearing you for the first time, though, give us a little bit about your background, who you are, and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's always great to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me. I'm currently a business student at Columbia Business School, but previously I worked at a few think tanks in the liberty space, particularly focusing on economic and education issues, and working on the data side on how to get those ideas in front of others. But I've been at Young Voices in various contributor roles for the last 3 years as well, and it's been a great time.
Well, we've got a great topic to discuss today. Although I was teasing you a little bit beforehand, we're going to be talking about Israel, and so I want to make sure I'm stepping very carefully. For good or for bad, Israel is a somewhat controversial subject, and I like to put it this way: the government of Israel is having its hands full with public relations concerns for any number of reasons. But you have an article in the Christian Post. Israel can't afford to alienate Christians. Give us a little bit of the background. Does this pertain specifically to an instance of the Holy Family Church in Gaza City accidentally being struck, or is there a larger concern about Israel alienating Christians?
Sure. Well, I think there's a bit of both there. So, as you mentioned a few months ago, perhaps the nadir of Israel's PR relations in the West was, a mortar struck the only Catholic church in the Gaza Strip, killing three people who were sheltered there, damaging the church, of course. That aside from the tragedy itself, I think led to a lot of accusations, even within the church, that Israel had done so on purpose and that Christians had become a target in the war. Israel denies that it was on purpose, and I very much believe their denial, but it doesn't change the fact that a tight urban warfare will always have these effects. Further, a lot of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, the names you often hear in the media, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, I think oftentimes don't really understand relations with the predominantly Christian West very well. And so they oftentimes don't realize that even if these incidents are accidental, aside from the human toll, they also stand to severely damage Israel's reputation in the West.
Well, it just seems like even, and this is applying more broadly. In the last few days, I have seen headlines about how Israel has to have the support of the Christian heartland here in America, and so there are a lot of things that they have to be concerned with, as you mentioned, with the war that is going on in Gaza right now. Um, some very unpleasant things are going to be happening. However, you mentioned in the article, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, actually issued a very rare public apology, which I mean, good for them for acknowledging that. Did they change anything in terms of their rules of engagement moving forward because of that incident?
We unfortunately don't know the specifics about whether they were changing their rules of engagement. They did mention that they were going to look into correcting these, but we have no concrete changes that are attributable to that specific incident. I do think, however, it did um, unleash a new impulse within Netanyahu to be a bit more conciliatory towards Western concerns. He spoke with the Pope for an hour after that incident. Um, I don't think they completely came to terms on where things stand. And further, I still think that that damaged the Western perception of Israel, rightly or wrongly. I also, however, think that going forward, they also need to recognize that the Christian community doesn't always have the same goals as the most nationalist wing of the Israeli government, right? To them, it very much is sort of a reclaiming the land, and that usually doesn't include Gaza, but does include the West Bank. But of course, Gazans are a bit of an impediment towards that when they have to worry about Hamas. Whereas to the Christian world, there's a variety of views, many of which hold favorable positions towards Israel, but it's not quite as tied up with just controlling the land, correct? And so I think finding that balance and understanding that, a lot of Christians don't share the same theological concerns as many of on the right in Israel do, is going to be probably an awkward consideration going forward in relations kind of between Western Christians and the further right elements of Israel.
Mike, talk to me a little bit about the shared history between Christians and Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Israel, obviously, aside from both religions going back thousands of years, with Judaism and Christianity, um, there of course has long been both Jewish and Christian presences in the land, even before the foundation of the state of Israel. About at this point, about 10% of the population of the West Bank and Gaza are Christian, and about 2% of Israel is Christian. By, if I'm not excuse me, I made an error. At the time of the foundation of Israel, Gaza and West Bank were about 10% Christian. They're now, I think, close to about the same 2% as Israel. There are numerically more Christians in Israel than in Gaza and the West Bank, but most of them are of Palestinian descent. It's very interesting in that one of the most successful minority groups in Israel are those Arab Christians. And I think a big part of Israel's ability in recent years to integrate those people, despite substantial bad blood historically going back to the 47 war, is very it's very admirable on the part of both communities. They're some of the most educated residents of Israel. Rights are very well respected. They're allowed to have Christian schools. They're allowed to instruct in Arabic, but um, nevertheless, Israel still, just by virtue of having a majority ethnicity, like any country, has that very awkward relationship between its Jewish large majority and its Arab minority, which again is in large part Christian and those elements need to be balanced going forward.
Mike, you mentioned in the article that the Christian community, particularly, has typically historically been very supportive of Israel, but there is a growing contingent on the political right that is starting to use some of the same anti-Semitic language that we've actually kind of come to see regularly from the left. I think of the college campus protest over the last couple of years, most of that rhetoric was coming primarily from the left. But tell me a little bit about what we're seeing from some on the, as you put it, ostensibly Christian right.
Yeah, I among multiple factions of American Christianity, both among conservative Protestants and among Catholics, there has been what I would call numerically pretty small but concerning growing element of anti-Semitism. I think it's almost to prove your worth. I found it a lot of the time within Catholicism among recent converts or adult reverts to Catholicism. But I think unfortunately needing to play up your commitment to Catholicism or to Christianity, people have started to believe that they need to start voicing anti-Israel concerns because they, again, see Jewish people as heretics or schismatics. That is, as a Catholic, that is not how we're called to engage with other people. And further, even if you disagree with Israel's policies in any regard, that it's just absolutely unchristian to turn that into an ethnic anti-Semitism or any sort of bias. And so I, of course, condemn that, but I think it's really concerning as, say, elements like the Holy Family incident are then magnified and perhaps misrepresented as even worse than they were, or as a deliberate attack against Christians. That unfortunately runs the risk of seriously amplifying those anti-Semitic trends.
You do make a strong case, though. It's in Israel's interest to be a strong partner to its Christian allies. Again, we're talking with Mike Viola. Mike, for people who want to follow you on social media or follow your work, what's the best place to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Substack or Twitter, or excuse me, X. Still hard to adapt to. At Mike Viola, all one word.
Thanks again. Look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Brian.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Satya Marar back to the program. He is Young Voices contributor. And Satya, you wear a few other hats as well. Tell us just a little bit about yourself for the sake of those meeting you for the first time.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a qualified lawyer in Australia. I moved here some years ago, and I now research and write on law and economics. I have a master's in economics from George Mason, and I work at the Mercatus Center, where my research interests focus on antitrust law, competition, and innovation.
Well, we've got a great article here of yours this is from discoursemagazine.com. New Arkansas law puts pharmacies before patients. And I have only in the last few years become familiar with this term PBMs, or pharmacy benefit managers. But tell me about what lawmakers in Arkansas were doing to address their concerns about these PBMs. What was the legislation? What did they hope to accomplish?
Sure. So most Americans are on, if they're on a health plan, they're either on Medicare or Medicaid, or they're on an employer-sponsored health plan. And what these health plans do to try and lower costs when they buy drugs from pharmacies or from drug makers is they use bulk buying power. They pool together insurance plans across many different customers, and that lets them buy at lower cost. And they do this through organizations known as PBMs, or pharmacy benefit managers. And what the PBMs do is they use bulk buying power. They make deals with drug makers to have the drugs covered under the insurance company's formularies, which means that they get rebates in return for that, which help to offset the costs of healthcare plans. Most of these savings are passed on to to health plan customers. A number of independent pharmacies are not huge fans of PBMs. They make the argument that, well, PBMs will try to steer patients over to their affiliated pharmacy chains. So CVS, for example, CVS Caremark is, of course, affiliated with CVS, the pharmacy chain. And they say this makes it harder for them to compete. They argue that PBMs sometimes have so much bulk buying power that they're able to negotiate rock bottom prices from pharmacies, which makes it harder for some pharmacies to survive. Now, the unfortunate thing is if you want to limit this form of competition, that means patients are going to be affected in the end of the day. PBM affiliated pharmacies operate often in many areas, which don't have huge populations. So an attempt to prevent PBMs from owning their own pharmacy chains, as Arkansas tried to do, will lead to less choice for a number of patients.
So you were telling me just before we came on the air here that this Arkansas Act 624 was signed into law by Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but I understand that a federal judge has stepped in and issued at least a preliminary injunction for the time being.
Yeah, that's right. In July, a federal judge enjoined the law from taking effect. Uh, in the meantime, though, there had already been reports of pharmacy closures that were going to happen in Arkansas in preparation for the law to take effect. The law makes a limited exception for PBMs selling certain orphan drugs or drugs to treat rare illnesses to keep operating through a permit, but those permits expire in a year, or a year or two. So that creates an amount of uncertainty that will affect patients. The judge, though, essentially said, this is a law that discriminates against out-of-state business. And so because of that, we enjoin it from taking effect since it would it's likely to violate the federal Constitution's Commerce Clause. But there are a number of other reasons why a bill like this is problematic. There's been a legislator in Tennessee, Bobby Harshbarger, who has proposed something similar in that state. So this is just something to keep on the radar because patients and their choice and their ability to get drugs at prices that appeal to them are at stake. Many patients prefer mail order pharmacies, which are often affiliated with a PBM, and that's a convenient option. It's one of the reasons why a number of these independent pharmacies in areas with low population often, for example, are closing, but also chain pharmacies, brick and mortar locations have reduced too in many parts of the country. So, all these changes are taking place, and we really want more competition, not less.
You know, I know people, I knock on wood when I say this, I don't have to take daily prescription drugs, but I know people who do. And I'm not talking just elderly people, but, people of all different ages. And the costs, when they talk about how much they are paying, even if they have insurance, are just staggering. So I'm imagining in my mind that one of the reasons why these PBMs would be so popular is if look, I need this medication, I have a health condition or my life depends on it. I'm looking for the best possible price that I can get, because let's face it, it's almost all expensive. But it sounds like Arkansas is artificially limiting competition in their quest to protect the customer. I mean, I should put that in air quotes, protect them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are seeing an issue of pharmacy deserts in many parts of the country where there are low populations usually. And so, if you're going to limit the number of pharmacies, and this is a deterrent against people entering the market and owning and operating them, you're going to see less of that. So, it's really hard to square what some might say, oh, we have to hold PBMs accountable because we want better outcomes for patients. Okay, if that's your intention, this is really one of the worst things you could possibly do. It's not protecting patients, it's putting pharmacies before patients. And what's interesting is a number of these pharmacies, they do something similar to PBMs. They have what are called pharmacy service administrative organizations, pooling the bulk buying power of many different pharmacies together to negotiate with PBMs. So the market is working the way it should work. This is not where I would start if I'm looking at how to lower drug prices for consumers.
Well, and it's interesting too. In your article, you point out that the proponents of Act 624 don't even accuse those PBMs of actually violating laws. It's not like, well, they're doing something illegal or something immoral or unethical. It's just a blanket prohibition on them being as organized as they have been.
Yeah, absolutely. Arkansas already has restrictions on PBM's ability to charge less to smaller pharmacies. And if they want to keep enforcing those laws, then great. But that's not what's going on over here. And one thing to keep in mind is vertical integration. When businesses join together up and down the supply chain, that is almost always good for consumers because unlike a horizontal merger, you're not reducing the number of competitors. You are you eliminate something called double marginalization, which means you don't have to levy a profit margin on two levels of the supply chain. So usually that leads to lower prices, more efficient use of assets and resources. And in the long run, that of course benefits consumers through lower prices and more access.
Talk to me about pharmacy deserts. You mentioned that in your article. When you use that term, what are we referring to?
So, I don't have the exact definition off the top of my head in terms of how many miles away a pharmacy needs to be for you to say that you live in a pharmacy desert. But basically, it's supply and demand. If you live in a community with very few people spread out over a large area, chances are it's going to be difficult to find a local pharmacy to get your medicine. One of the ways that people get around this issue is through mail order or mail delivery pharmacies becoming increasingly popular nowadays. Amazon has entered the space. I believe Walmart has as well, and then you have, of course, CVS, Caremark, and other parties. And it's not really an issue of PBM affiliated or chain or independent pharmacies. We don't want to stop this kind of market-based innovation that is helping people in these areas access their medicine because, quite frankly, there's not a whole lot you can do when an area is going through a period of decline and the population is leaving. It's much easier to have these options in place rather than to try to say, let's come in from the outside and have an external intervention for this community.
So we've got about a minute or so here. Let's talk. What needs to happen? There's an injunction in place for now, but it's not going to last forever. If we want to serve the patients without without them being otherwise limited or I can't even say harm because I'm not sure that any harm has taken place with the PBMs. What's the best step for government at this point?
Well, I mean, they should, whatever the court ends up saying in the end, this is not a good law for patients. They should abolish it. And if they want to protect pharmacies, then, they already have some laws in place around the ability of PBMs to so-called underpay smaller pharmacies. Now, I mean, those laws might have inadvertent negative effects on patients. We don't know. But regardless, they can keep enforcing existing laws. PBMs in some instances have been accused, individual PBMs, of not passing on all the savings they were meant to pass on under their contracts. In the state of Illinois, for example, successfully sued them. Didn't go to a verdict. They denied wrongdoing, but they got a settlement out of it. So, keep enforcing the existing laws and let different kinds of businesses operate in a competitive marketplace.
We've been visiting with Satya Marar. He's a visiting postgraduate fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University and a Young Voices contributor. Where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter, Satya Marar, and most of my articles get posted there, and my research gets put up on mercatus.org under the antitrust and competition space.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our fourth and final segment today. We're happy to welcome Aiden Grogan back to the program. Aiden, it's good to see you once again. Take a moment, and for the sake of those meeting you for the first time, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Aiden Grogan. I'm a history PhD candidate at Liberty University and the donor communications manager at the American Institute for Economic Research.
All right, you opened my eyes with an article that you have published in National Review on the coming Japanification of economies. And at first, the title threw me a little bit because I was thinking, oh, it's going to be smaller, more efficient. I was thinking like, radios, cars, things like that, appliances. No, we're talking about aging populations. And I honestly had really not thought a lot about this. Talk to me a little bit about what happened with the population of Japan to where they don't have a growing population. When did that begin?
So Japan fell below replacement level fertility in the mid 1970s. So they've been experiencing this waning fertility for about half a century. And they're the first who are undergoing this Japanification process, as I've labeled it, where you have a skyrocketing old age dependency ratio with more retirees than workers. And Japan is currently experiencing this fiscal crisis driven by Social Security deficits because they just don't have the working age population to provide these benefits to the elderly population. Japan is really the test case or the model for where a lot of the world is headed later this century due to low fertility rates. The Lancet Medical Journal projects that at least 95% of countries are going to dip below replacement level fertility by the end of this century. So we should really keep our eyes on Japan to see how the Japanese can deal with this problem and how we can implement solutions throughout the rest of the world this century.
So I have to ask that declining fertility rate, is that by choice? Is this because the populations of these countries are choosing to have fewer and fewer children?
Yeah, fertility rates are closely correlated with the number of children that women say they want to have. And the reality is, for complex reasons, women in the 21st century simply want fewer children than they used to have. In the 1970s, for example, when fertility preference surveys would be conducted, especially in rural areas of developing countries, it was very common for those conducting the surveys to hear responses like, "It's up to God how many children I have," or "I'll have as many children as God wills." There were non-numeric answers. But according to more recent surveys, such as one recently conducted by the UN Population Fund, the most common example worldwide of the most common answer is for two children. That's the average. People just generally want two children around the world. But many people don't end up achieving that desired fertility. They end up having one child or no children. So you have rising rates of childless women, and that's contributing to the huge declines in fertility that we're observing.
So let's talk about what this does, intergenerationally to relationships. We've heard of the generation gap, but talk to me about uh, the burden that is placed on these younger up and coming generations to provide, the necessary taxes that the older generations need. Does that bring a certain amount of resentment along with it?
We can definitely expect to see rising intergenerational resentment as we head into this aging and depopulating future, especially in democratic countries, because old people are unlikely to vote for political parties or candidates who pledge to revoke the generous benefits that they were promised. And when you have a larger elderly population than younger population, The elderly simply have a lot more political power. They have more votes, and they also tend to vote more than young people in democracies. So younger people will be increasingly dispossessed of political power, and they will have increasingly exorbitant taxes pinned on them. Um, in a depopulating world, housing might become cheaper and wages might go up, but that could also be offset by the heavy tax burden that working people are going to face.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like a very unenviable position to be in, to be a young worker who is, trying to get started in life, and yet your taxes are higher than maybe the taxes that your parents or grandparents paid. And you have no choice of you don't get to vote your way out of it because you're outnumbered by the people who need those taxes to provide their benefits.
Exactly. Yeah. A top priority, especially in democracies this century, is going to be figuring out a way to reform entitlements, particularly Social Security or whatever equivalent of Social Security that certain countries have.
Very interesting. At what point? I mean, I guess I'm asking you, can you see the future, Aiden? But we have 50 years of watching Japan and its declining population. What have they figured out that works versus where are they continuing to struggle? Where other countries are likely to struggle that are following in their footsteps?
Yeah, so the biggest problem, of course, is the skyrocketing old age dependency ratio. The problem with depopulation is the inverted population pyramid, where you just have more retirees than workers. And we've yet to figure out a way to sustain our affluence and have fiscal sanity in a depopulating world because the world has never experienced anything like this before. The closest example would be the Black Death in the 14th century, but that was a disease that would have most likely killed more old people than young people. So late medieval Europe did not experience the dilemma of an inverted population pyramid where you have more old people than young people. So we've never experienced this before, and that's why economists, demographers, and policymakers really don't know what to do or where to start. I've made the case that a commitment to free enterprise, open trade, deregulation, etc., should be our first priorities, especially small, depopulating countries. They're going to be increasingly dependent on capital, goods, and services imported from abroad because they'll have a declining productivity and declining specialization due to fewer people.
And let's talk for a moment about the prospect of immigration. I've heard the argument used. Well, that's why you bring in as many immigrants as possible. Then they can do the work and they can pay the taxes. And is that a feasible solution?
Immigrants can help stave off the problem of aging and depopulation, but it's not a long-term solution since declining fertility is a truly global phenomenon. It's happening everywhere in rich and poor countries alike. So we can't view that as a forever solution. Eventually, people are going to have to decide that having children is worth the opportunity costs, and it's necessary to drive economic growth and to keep our fiscal systems functioning.
So I know this is very oversimplified, but is having more children part of the solution?
It absolutely is, but no one has yet figured out a way to convince people to have more children. Various governments have implemented pronatal policies to encourage people to have more kids, but the effects of these programs has been marginal increases in fertility at best, or in some cases, no increases in fertility. Uh, the strange reality is that as a country becomes more prosperous and free, people simply have more opportunities for how they can spend their lives, and children increasingly become viewed as a burden rather than as a blessing as they are on a rural farm. Um, so the great task is to convince people that having children is good and that the opportunity costs of having children are worth it.
Again, we've been visiting with Aiden Grogan. He is a Young Voices contributor, among other things. Where can people find you on social media?
You can follow me on X at Aiden Grogan.